Okay, so we're starting over from here. Matthew, chapter 14, beginning at verse 22. Immediately Jesus made his disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side, while he sent the multitudes away. And when he had sent the multitudes away, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray. Now when evening came, he was alone there, but the boat was now in the middle of the sea, tossed by the waves, for the wind was contrary. Now in the fourth watch of the night, Jesus went to them, walking on the sea. And when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were troubled, saying, "It is a ghost." And they cried out for fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, "Be of good cheer, it is I, do not be afraid." And Peter answered him and said, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come out on the water." So he said, "Come." And when Peter had come down out of the boat, he walked on the water to Jesus. But when he saw that the wind was boisterous, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried out, saying, "Lord, save me." And immediately Jesus stretched out his hand and caught him, and said to him, "O you of little faith, why did you doubt?" And when they got into the boat, the wind ceased. Then those who were in the boat came and worshipped him, saying, "Truly you are the Son of God." When they had crossed over, they came to the land of Gennesaret. And when the men of that place recognized him, they sent out into all the surrounding region, brought to him all who were sick, and begged him that they might only touch the hem of his garment. And as many as touched it were made perfectly well. Father, once again, we get the privilege and the honor of gathering together in your name with your people, your eclectic and yet beautiful and amazing family. Thank you that we have your word. There are so many places in the world, even right now, where if it's not illegal, it's going to be real soon. And even those who want it face terrible persecution. And we have this incredible ability to walk down to a store or pick up our phones and our computer, and we can have access to your word at any time. Don't let us ever take that for granted. Let us see what a blessing and a joy and a beauty that is. And we ask that your Spirit would come and fill this place, that you would speak to each person out of this text. Whatever it is, we know that you speak to us each in different ways. And so let your Spirit move among us and speak to each of us. Clear this place of any evil that's found its way in, and just fill this entire place, your house, to overflowing with your Spirit. Don't let anybody leave here without the sweet scent of having been with Jesus on them. And all this I ask in the beautiful and blessed name of Jesus. Amen. So for those of you who are new, my name is Carl, and welcome to the Wednesday night service. We are chronologically going through the life of Jesus. So all four Gospels put together. We're about a little over halfway through Jesus' ministry, but actually only about a third of the way through the Gospels, because Jesus' life, the account of his life, is very heavy on the back end, because so many important things, because everything's building to the cross, which is the pinnacle event in all of human history. So this week, as you might well gather, we're at Peter walking on the Sea of Galilee. Let me give you a little background. When last we saw our hero, he was on a mountain in a remote area on the shore of the Sea of Galilee near the city of Bethsaida. And this week I brought a map, and We won't have to use Carl's magic flannel laugh. You can see the actual Sea of Galilee, Capernaum being here, and the area Jesus went to being over here near Bethsaida. So didn't go really all the way across the lake. He just kind of cut off the top tip of it. I'm going to use it again, so I'm going to hang on to it. That won't pass around. But Jesus had gone there seeking rest and quiet, time away from the crowds, for he and his disciples who had just returned from their first solo missionary journeys. Jesus was also mourning the death of his cousin and fellow kingdom worker, John the Baptizer, at the hands of Herod Antipas and his manipulative, murderous wife, Herodias. It is also likely that he was staying one step ahead of Herod Antipas, who was seeking to see him and know if he was John the Baptizer resurrected from the dead or somebody else. Jesus had set out by boat from Capernaum earlier in the day. As he sailed out, he was recognized as Jesus the miracle worker. Word quickly spread that he was on the lake, and people from all over the area raced around the lake ahead of him. Arriving on the shore, Jesus is met by what Matthew's gospel describes as a great multitude of people. Rather than being upset that he would not find the rest and quiet that he was seeking there, Jesus sees the crowd and is moved deeply with compassion towards them because they were as sheep not having a shepherd. So he moves up the mountainside and begins to teach them of the kingdom of God and heal them that needed healing. As evening approaches, the 12 come to Jesus and suggest that he send away the crowd so that they can find food for themselves. Jesus promptly tells them, they do not need to go away. You give them something to eat. The 12 cannot possibly fathom how this could be done and debate with Jesus how he expects them to do such a thing. Should we go to town? Should we take some money and buy some bread? Where are we going to buy bread? Where are you going to buy bread? The 12 can only see the natural. They are stuck on the fact that in and of themselves they cannot accomplish what Jesus has told them to do. And as such, they're not even able to inquire as to how God might want to accomplish such a task through them. So Jesus shows them where their power lies. Finding one boy with 5 loaves and 2 salted fish, Jesus takes it, blesses it before God, and turns this boy's meager provisions into enough food to feed roughly 10,000 men, women, and children. This is an absolutely monumental accomplishment, a true miracle that will stick in the memory of everyone who witnessed it. So much so that each of the gospel writers will retell it from their unique perspective, making this the only miracle performed by Jesus to be retold in all 4 gospel accounts. The events we look at this week will be drawn from Matthew's gospel record, his account being the most complete. And this is kind of split into 2 events, the ship travel and then the reception at Gennesaret. And the first passage, Jesus walking on the water, is also recorded in Mark 6:45 through 52 and John 6:14 through 21. And of course, as I always do, I'll be plugging in from all those sources. And the second event, the reception in Gennesaret, is also recorded in Mark 6:53 through 56. Now this is mind-boggling, but Matthew's account is the only one to record the most well-known event in the life of the Apostle Peter. And this being his walking on the Sea of Galilee to meet Jesus. For some reason I really cannot explain, Matthew is the only one to record this event. It doesn't appear anywhere else in the Gospels. Anything I say about this would be pure speculation, so I'm not going to say anything other than it is interesting that it doesn't appear in Mark's Gospel, especially as Mark's Gospel is largely gathered from what Peter told Mark or what Mark heard Peter preach. So the one conclusion we can speculatively draw from this is that Peter never preached on this event, nor did he relate it in conversation to his trusted disciple Mark, which is very interesting. So this week's text picks up immediately after the disciples gather up the 12 baskets of leftovers from the feast. So beginning at verse 22, immediately Jesus made his disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side, while he sent the multitudes away. So Jesus has just fed 5,000, and the disciples have gathered up at Jesus' command, gathered up everything that was left over, counted 12 baskets, and suddenly Jesus wants them on a boat and gone out of town. The writer here uses the word immediately. In the King James Version, it's translated straight away. Both words convey this sense of urgency. Why? John's Gospel gives us the clue. John 6:14 and 15. Then those men, when they had seen the sign that Jesus did, said that this is truly the prophet who has come into the world. Therefore, when Jesus perceived that they were about to come and take him by force to make him king, he departed again to the mountain by himself alone. So those close enough to Jesus to actually see what had happened begin to talk. And their discussion is that this guy, he's the guy. He's the guy. And we need right now to make him our king. Now Jesus had done so many miracles. I mean, by the hundreds and thousands, Jesus is just lining them up and knocking them down. He's just healing everybody of everything. He's healed the sick, caused the lame to walk, gives sight to the blind, freed the spiritually oppressed, and even brought 2 people back from the dead. And yet, prior to this point, there's been no mention of making this man king. I speculate that this is because of all the miracles up to this point, they were extremely limited in scope. They only affected the person on whom the miracle was performed. This man was a healer. So if you're not sick, lame, blind, demon-possessed, or dead, then you didn't really have a good reason to come to Jesus. You didn't really have a need that Jesus could help you with. And again, I am talking in the natural realm here. All of these things are secondary to Jesus' main objective, which was to call people back to and make it possible for every man to be right with their Creator. As we've seen before, many of these people are spiritually blind and simply cannot see that what they truly lack is rightness with God. That the things of this world, their physical needs, are secondary and will come when they first address their primary need for forgiveness of sins. And I think the proof of that is that they wanted to make him king. If they truly believed they were in the presence of the Son of God, why weren't they on their faces worshiping? The signs and wonders wrought through Jesus were signs of his divinity, not the primary purpose for his coming. So with this miracle, the people begin to see Jesus as the prophet Moses said would come in Deuteronomy chapter 18. Moses could do miracles, but what he primarily did was for the people was to go to God so that he would provide for them, feed them, and give them water to drink. This whole scene on this mountainside near Bethsaida is just that almost a recreation of the children of Israel in the wilderness. When Moses was telling the children of Israel about the things of God, his laws, and his desire to lead them, he was okay. He was, that guy. Moses, you go before God and smooth everything over for us, and we'll be over here doing our thing. You never see the children of Israel going up to Moses and asking him to teach them more about their God. Never once do you, hey, Mo, you were up there with God, weren't you? Tell us more. What was it like? What did you see? Tell us. You never hear that. You never hear that. But when they're hungry and they're thirsty, if Mo and Aaron don't come through fast enough, they're ready to kill him. When Moses feeds them or brings them water to drink or keeps God from wiping them out, suddenly he's their beloved leader. It would seem that since the Exodus, not much has changed in the hearts of the children of Israel. They desire someone to take care of them, no strings attached. They are slaves to their bellies. So with this miracle, the people see Jesus as the prophet like Moses, who was to come, and all they want out of him is to be fed and to be free of their enslavement to these horrible Romans, just like Moses did for the children of Israel with the Egyptians. So, all that to get here. Why did Jesus bum rush his disciples out of there? Because he knew that they had the same tendencies in their own hearts. Despite all Jesus had taught them, they still thought Jesus was there to ultimately set up an earthly kingdom. This is why Peter will rebuke Jesus when he tells him, I'm marching to Jerusalem to die. This is why James and John will argue to sit at his right hand and left hand, because they think he's setting up an earthly throne. Jesus does not want his disciples to be caught up in this messianic fervor that was beginning to stir among this group of people, so he sends them away post haste. And lest we get big heads, it's not just the Jews of that day who saw Jesus as nothing more than a miracle-working food truck. I look around in so many areas of what today passes for evangelical Christianity, and people just want to come to Jesus for what they can get out of him. I got bills. Will Jesus help me pay my bills? Will Jesus help me get my car fixed? Will Jesus help me find a husband or a wife? There are far too many people within the church community and pastors selling this too, this prosperity gospel that says, Jesus is all about what he can do for me. Nothing's really changed. We're not really any better than they were. Verse 23, and when he had sent the multitudes away, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray. Now, when evening came, he was alone there. So no matter what demands were placed on Jesus, we will see him repeatedly always finding time to pray. Always. Communing with God the Father was a priority in Jesus' life. And if it was a priority in Jesus' life, then shouldn't it be in ours as well? And I'm saying this mostly to myself. I struggle with this. I struggle with what do you say to God? I mean, when you try to praise him, I know that every word that comes out of my mouth doesn't even come close to doing justice to what God is. And how many times do I got to ask for things? And it's this act of faith of knowing that God is there and that he's listening even when he doesn't answer you. And I get to that point where I just crave, God, please just talk to me. I could do this literally all day, and maybe that's why he doesn't do it, because I'm not sure I would ever give it up out of a chair if God actually started having a conversation with me. Perhaps that's why, because I never get anything else done. You'd have to send me away, kick me out, because if I got to actually start talking. But if Jesus made time to pray, we should too. Verse 24, but the boat was now in the middle of the sea, tossed by the waves, for the wind was contrary. John adds some more to this. John 6:16 through 18. Now when evening came, his disciples went down to the sea, got into the boat, and went over the sea toward Capernaum. And it was already dark, and Jesus had not come to them. Then the sea arose because a great wind was blowing. So Jesus' disciples are in the boat heading towards Capernaum, which is kind of right across the top here, when a great contrary wind comes across the lake. And I take this to mean it was blowing in their face, just and pushing them back as they tried to row towards Capernaum. John 6:19 tells us that they had only managed to make it about 3 or 4 miles from their point of origin. So we got 12 guys rowing. Perhaps at least, maybe better than a quarter of them are seasoned fishermen, boaters, who grew up in and around this body of water and know how to row a boat. They are flailing away and basically getting nowhere. In their own power, they cannot make it to their destination. Verse 25. Now on the 4th watch of the night, Jesus went to them walking on the sea. Now we know Jesus had been up on the mountain praying, and now he is suddenly walking towards them on the sea. Why did Jesus choose this moment to arrive? Was it that he was just done praying and it was time to go to the other side of the lake? It's possible, but somehow I doubt it. Mark gives us this additional information in chapter 6, verses 47 and 48. Now when evening came, the boat was in the middle of the sea, and he was alone on the land, he being Jesus. Then he saw them straining at rowing, for the wind was against them. Now about the 4th watch of the night, he came to them walking on the sea and would have passed them by. So Jesus was up on the mountain praying, but he was also watching. He was keeping an eye on his boys, watching them cross the sea. He knows they are struggling, and he goes to them. He has let them struggle for a while. In fact, the majority of the night. They were sent out before dark, which would have been about 6 o'clock p.m. Now, how do I get that? Jews divided the day into 2 parts. You had daytime and nighttime. Daytime was from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. And those were measured in hours of the day. So the second hour of the day would be 8 a.m. in our time. Now, nighttime was from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. And the night was divided up into 4 watches. This was basically a military term. It was how long a man would be on guard duty or on a watchtower overlooking a city. 4 watches in a night, so each watch is about 3 hours long. So if Jesus comes during the 4th watch of the night, it is between 3 and 6 a.m. So they have been on the sea for a long time. So this is the last watch of the night, just before the dawn. So they had been rowing literally all night and had only managed to make it less than 4 miles. The last statement in Mark's gospel is very interesting, and he would have passed them by. Verse 26 and 27. When the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were troubled, saying, "It is a ghost." And they cried out for fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, "Be of good cheer. It is I. Do not be afraid." This is actually a really interesting response by the disciples. The idea of ghosts is strictly a Gentile concept or idea. Ghosts or specters, the word used here in the Greek is phantasma, completely goes against the Jewish concept of afterlife as it does amongst Christians. There just is no such thing. The Bible makes it plain that after death, our spirits or souls are escorted either to heaven or hell. Pre-resurrection, it was to paradise or hell, righteous side of hell or the side of hell you don't want to be in. There are no disembodied souls wandering the earth or trapped between dimensions or whatever occultic concept you want to plug in here. It doesn't exist. So the fact that the disciples here at first think this figure passing their boat is a ghost shows that occult or pagan concepts had invaded Jewish culture. And the same can be said of our day today. It is quite sad really extremely sad to see in surveys how many people who say they believe in God, the creator of heaven and earth, and his son Jesus, who also believe in the existence of ghosts, and that the spirits of those who have passed come back to visit them and speak with them and share things with them. The Bible does not teach this, and it is a dangerous belief that can lead people away from the true God. It is a far bigger subject than we have time for tonight, but it's here in the text, and I would be remiss if I didn't say something. The more important thing to note here is how quickly Jesus responds to their fears. And the way he does it is, I think, even more significant. Jesus responds to their cries by saying, "Be of good cheer." I'm losing my good cheer real quick.
With the fly?
Yeah.
Need a bug of salt.
Yeah, we do. Be of good cheer. It is I. Do not be afraid. And I want to focus on the phrase, it is I. The Greek words that make up this phrase are emi, ego. It can be translated, as it is here, it is I. That's not necessarily an incorrect translation. The flow of the statement does fit and seem to make sense, and thus it was translated that way. But it can also be translated as a similar phrase, and I think that this is actually what Jesus meant for them to hear, and it is significant. I believe this should be translated the same way it is in John 8:58. Jesus said to them, "Most assuredly I say to you, before Abraham was, I am." I am in John 8:58 is the same phrase used for it is I here in Matthew 14:27. I am, as I hope you all know, is the ancient name of God that God gave to Moses in Exodus 3:14. And God said to Moses, "I am who I am." And he said, "Thus you shall say to the children of Israel, I am has sent me to you." And I went back and looked in the Septuagint, which is the Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible, and emi, ego, is in that verse. I couldn't read it, but it's there. This statement, I think, could be read literally, "Be of good cheer, I am. Do not be afraid." I believe that Jesus wants them to hear him identify himself with the ancient name, the sacred name of God, I am. And there's another verse that I think reinforces this idea we'll get to in a minute. So the boys are in a boat rowing all night. They are getting nowhere. Jesus is watching, and after letting them struggle in their own power for a while, he comes out to them, walking on the water. They are scared out of their minds, and immediately Jesus tells them, "Cheer up. I am is here. There is no need for fear." This is Jesus in full superhero mode. Verse 28, "And Peter answered him and said, Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water. Lord, if it is you, bid me come." The text gives us absolutely no clue what prompted Peter to respond to Jesus in this way. I have no idea what the thought process in this guy's mind was. Hey, let's go for a walk. It is possible that Peter is just scared out of his mind and simply blurts something ridiculous out. That's happened before. It's entirely possible. Perhaps. But this is what I would like to believe. This is what I'd like to hear. And again, this is only my take on it. Take it as that. Perhaps, Peter is the only one of the bunch that got a clue as to what Jesus was trying to teach them with the feeding of the 5,000. With God, anything is possible. Take what you have and give it to Jesus and watch him do amazing things with it. In this case, Peter is taking the little tiny wee bit of faith that he possesses and he is going to put it in the hands of Jesus. In Peter's mind, this is what I hear going on. Okay, just suppose, I believe that it is really you out there walking on the water, Jesus. One of the lessons we just learned is that you can do anything with almost nothing. So, what can you do with my little bit of faith in you? Can you let me walk on water just like you are? You gave me power to heal in your name. You gave me power over the force of darkness in your name. Just a few hours ago, you implied that through the power of God that you gave me, I could have fed 5,000 people with 5 loaves and 2 fish. Can I walk on water with that power? I would like to think that Peter was the one who on some level caught a glimpse of what Jesus was trying to show them in the feeding of the 5,000s, and that's what prompts him to ask Jesus this question. In the real world, in outside of the spiritual world, in the natural, what Peter has just asked is insane. Peter must somehow grasp, if even for a fleeting moment, that by faith in God and his Son, Jesus, anything is possible. Even the impossible can happen. Verse 29, so he said, come. And when Peter had come down out of the boat, he walked on the water to go to Jesus. I believe with all of my heart, and I will have to get to heaven and see evidence otherwise for me to ever change this, that Jesus said come with the biggest, most radiant, proud Papa smile that you can possibly imagine on his face. I believe his face glowed with joy over Peter's request. This is exactly what Jesus was looking for among the children of Israel: faith. And Peter's faith is rewarded, and he walks on water, and it is glorious, even if it only lasted for 2 steps. Verses 30 and 31. But when he saw that the wind was boisterous, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried out, Lord, save me. And immediately Jesus stretched out his hand and caught him and said to him, oh, you of little faith, why did you doubt? I had this thing I want to do, and I guess I'm going to do it now because I want you to see this. I haven't actually got to this part, but I'm gonna really quick. we were Heather and I was at one of Heather's bookstore conferences, and I saw this piece of artwork, and it's just, I had to have it. It's Jesus reaching down in the water, and I want you to look at the look on his face. I remember that as we talk about this.
Awesome.
So in these 2 verses, we see a bunch of things. Peter jumps out of the boat in faith, but he soon begins to sink. Why? The text tells us straight up, fear. He was afraid. He had faith that Jesus could allow him to walk on the water, but then he was afraid of the mighty wind that was blowing about once he got out on the water. It's crazy. As if Jesus would let him walk on the water, but couldn't or wouldn't get him through the storm. And Jesus gives Peter's fear another name: doubt. Why did you doubt? Fear is a natural thing. God gave us fear for a reason, to keep us from doing dumb things like swimming with sharks or petting tigers like they're kittens. Those are dumb things. God gave us fear to not do those things. But fear should always make us look to God. In this case, because Peter was told to come, there should have been no fear. Peter has been in a boat with Jesus before. When Jesus summons you, when Jesus calls you out on the water, you know, the last time they were, hey, we're going to go to the other side of the lake, though. When they were going to see the Gadarenes and the demoniacs are on the other side, they got out in the middle of the lake, and Peter's like, hey, wake up! Don't you know we're going to die? Because there's another storm, because it's the Sea of Galilee, and that's what happens there. Especially if Jesus is in the boat. There's just storms. And Peter's, hey, don't you care? We're going to die. And Jesus is like, I told you we were going to the other side of the lake. Done. They're on the other side of the lake. If Jesus calls you, he didn't say we're going out in the lake to die. He didn't say we're going out in the middle of the lake to drown. He didn't say we're going to boat halfway and swim the rest of the way. He said we're going to the other side of the lake. When Jesus summons you, when Jesus calls you out into something, you can be sure that he is the I am, the eternal God. There is no contingency that he has not planned for, even the stuff that can scare your pants off along the way. If God calls you out, you can rest assured that his call includes every provision needed to answer the call. Remember, just a little while back, just a few weeks back, we were in Capernaum. Jesus is walking through the town, and Jairus comes up, hey, my little girl is sick. And by the time Jesus gets to the house, she's dead. A dead child lying on a bed in a room, and Jesus simply calls her Talitha Kumi. Little girl, arise, and she does, because the power to answer the call comes with the call. He didn't touch her first. He didn't summon any. He just said, come, and the power to answer that call came with the call. And it is really easy to camp out on the fact that Peter's faith stumbles when he suddenly realizes what is happening and all that is working against him, and say that Peter once again has gotten too big for his britches. He had no business stepping out of the boat in the first place, because he obviously didn't have enough faith. And I beg with you not to go there. Please don't camp out in that place. And there are actually two acts of faith here. Peter, in faith, made his request, and he put that faith in the hands of Jesus, and by faith he stepped out of the boat and he walked on water. That is the first act of faith. And yes, his faith was overcome by fear, and he began to sink. But in the midst of that fear and the crumbling of his faith, he again acted in faith. He cried out to Jesus, Lord, save me. I don't know how far away Jesus was or how far Peter made it before he began to sink, but he could have simply swam back, or at least attempted to swim back to the boat, but he didn't. He immediately realized that the only way to overcome his weak faith was to cry out to Jesus. Don't merely see Peter sinking because of weak faith. See that a little faith can get you out of the boat. And doing something impossible, walking on water. And when your faith stumbles, you cry out to Jesus in faith for more faith, knowing that he will reach out and pull you up out of the waves. Don't say, I can't do that, I don't have enough faith. If the desire has been put in your heart to do something for God, if God has shown you a need, just launch out and go as far as the faith you have will take you, knowing that when you stumble, Jesus will be there to pick you up and strengthen your faith. He will give you more faith when you put the faith you have into action. Faith is a gift from above. Why would God give you more faith when you're not exercising the faith that you have? God will take you to the limits of your faith, because it is in that moment that he can step in and bridge the gap. He saves the day, and in that he gets the glory, and your faith grows, knowing that it is not you, it's him, and his resources are limitless. Our faith does not grow in success nearly as much as it does in absolute abstract failure. And that is the lesson of Peter walking on the water. I promise you, if this were to happen again, Peter may not make it all the way to Jesus the next time either, but I guarantee you he will get closer than he did this time. Because Peter's faith was strengthened by the failure. Peter now knows that when he has gone as far as his faith will take him, that I am is right there to keep his head above the waves. I don't think we should ever be afraid of sinking. We should be afraid of not getting out of the boat. And finally, in this passage, don't you think that Jesus, please don't think that Jesus is rebuking Peter here. I don't see that at all. I think he has the same radiant, proud Papa smile on his face that he had when he told Peter, come. The phrase, "O you of little faith," is actually in the Greek one word, oligopistas, wow, which simply means little faith. "O you of" is added by the translators to make it flow in the sentence. "O you of little faith" definitely sounds like a rebuke. But if Jesus said simply little faith, I think that makes it far more, in my mind, a term of endearment. Little faith, why did you doubt? Rather than a rebuke, Jesus' words are words of encouragement, words of reassurance. As much as it points out why Peter failed, it is the key to succeeding the next time he is called out in faith. Just don't doubt me. Little faith. Just don't doubt. If you're a little unsure of my conclusions about this, if you think I'm being just a little too touchy-feely, Jesus knew before he called Peter out that he would make it all the way. He knew in advance that Peter would stumble. That leaves you with one of two conclusions: that Jesus, unless God is a cosmic prankster or a cool kid with a magnifying glass perched over an anthill who takes pleasure in seeing people stumble, or who enjoys seeing people suffer. That is not the God I believe in, and more importantly, that is not the God revealed in the Bible. And therefore, you must conclude that Jesus called Peter out because it would be a thrilling, amazing exercise of his little faith, and that his stumbling would lead to greater faith, so that the next time Peter is called to put his faith in action, he will respond with greater courage than he had before. Jesus called Peter out with the smile of a proud father, and he lifted Peter up from under the waves with the same smile and spoke to him words of encouragement, like any good father would when his child is first learning to walk. In this case, learning to walk by faith and not by sight. Verse 32, and when they got in the boat, the wind ceased. Now, John's account tells us not only did the wind cease, but when Jesus got into the boat, they were suddenly also at their destination. Verse 33, then those who were in the boat came and worshipped him, saying, truly, you are the Son of God. Now, Mark's gospel tells us something else, and it took me quite a while, and I forgot to sort this out in my brain, how this all worked. Mark 6:51 and 52. Then he went up into the boat to them, and the wind ceased, and they were greatly amazed in themselves beyond measure, and marveled, for they had not understood about the loaves, because their heart was hardened. And this seems like two really opposite responses, and if it's in the Bible, it's both. We just have to understand. So it says they were greatly amazed in themselves beyond measure and marveled. That is an incredible string of words put together to describe what's going on in the apostles' minds. And the next verse is incredibly interesting and revealing. For they had not understood about the loaves because their heart was hardened. The for, as we've talked about before, is a connector word, so it joins the two sentences. It could also be because. So they were greatly amazed beyond measure and marveled because they had not understood the miracle of the loaves. That implies to me that they should not have been greatly amazed beyond measure and marveling. And they are because they missed what the miracle of the loaves was meant to show them. The miracle of the loaves was meant to show Jesus' deity. They were meant to see the old covenant picture of God as the provider for the children of Israel. Just like we talked about earlier, just like we talked about last week. In the wilderness, God had provided bread in the form of manna every single day out of nothing. And here was Jesus in the wilderness with almost nothing. He feeds thousands of people just like God had done, God the Father, Yahweh had done for their forefather. And this tells us they completely missed it, except for Peter. I'm voting that Peter got a picture. Piece of it. And they missed it because, as we saw last week, they were totally focused on what they could do in their own power. So Jesus sent them out in the boat knowing that they would run up against a contrary wind and they would struggle. And under their own power, they would get almost nowhere. And when they had reached the end of what their own efforts could accomplish, Jesus stepped in and showed them who he is in a fashion so dramatic that they could not possibly miss it this time. This is why I believe so firmly that Jesus announced himself with the sacred name of God, Yahweh, I am, because they had missed it the first time. All but one of them anyways. I still think Peter got it. But they did not miss it this time. For this time, despite their marvel and wonder and awe, they gathered around Jesus and they did what every man should do when they realized they were in the presence of the living God. I am. They worshiped him. Verse 44, when they had crossed over, they came to the land of Gennesaret. So they were heading towards Capernaum. Jesus had, in the text, told them where to go, so they're just heading over here, and they wind up here, because now that the captain's in the ship, they're getting where he wants them to go. Pass that around now. As you can see, they were rowing in the right general direction, but Jesus decided to go a little further south. And when they arrived, verse 35 and 36, and when the men of that place recognized them, they sent out into all the surrounding region, brought to him all who were sick, and begged him that they might only touch the hem of his garment. And as many as touched it were made perfectly well. So, try to wrap all this up. Mark 6:52 links the miracle of the feeding of the 5,000 to the events that we looked at today. The fact that they didn't understand the meaning of the parable of the loaves. These two things are linked. It would seem that the feeding of the 5,000 was meant to show the disciples something about themselves and Jesus. They did not comprehend what Jesus was illustrating for them in the feeding of the 5,000, so Jesus sent them out into a situation where he could again illustrate the same ideas to them. I believe there are two main lessons. One, we will come up against insurmountable odds. We will be called to do tasks that we cannot possibly complete on our own. It might be we need to feed 10,000 people and the cupboards are bare. Or it might be that Jesus tells us to go to the other side of the lake and everything is coming against you to keep that from happening. Or maybe Jesus says, come, walk on water with me. The answer in both cases, in all three cases, in every case, is to look to Jesus, to put everything in his capable hands. And two, when we put things in his hands, it's going to be taken care of because he is God. Who else can turn one small boy's lunch into enough food to feed 10,000 people? Who can walk on water? Who else can calm the storm that is blowing your boat backwards? Those are things only God can do. Jesus is God come to dwell among us, Emmanuel, and with God all things are possible. Everything. So, if we decide to go practical, anybody in a storm today? Anybody facing an absolutely, seemingly impossible task? It's by design. It's there for a reason. Jesus wants you to see him for who he really is. That hurt, that pain, that storm, that tragedy, that sickness is there for a reason. So that we will turn from ourselves and look to God. In both of these cases, they went as far as they possibly could under their own power. And then Jesus steps in to save the day because he is our hero. He is our God and our King and our Savior. Jesus wants you to see him for who he really is. Whether it's for the first time ever, maybe you don't know Jesus. Jesus wants you to see who he really is. Or maybe you do know who Jesus is, but it's not as fresh in your mind as it should be. You're not remembering it as well as you should. So that you can go, hey, take me out. Take me, can I come? Instead of going, oh crap. Not this again. Not more of this. No. Once you see Jesus for who he truly is, it becomes so so much easier to put all that we have into his abundantly capable hands. It starts by seeing Jesus for who he really is. God, the provider, King of everything. And then let's just put what we have in his hands. Our lives, our resources, whatever we got in Jesus' hands, it's going to be amazing. I promise.